So back in the good old days, standardisation didn't exist. Now last time on the channel I talked about how the qualifying format in Formula 1 has evolved over the last 70 odd years, and in that I talked about the 1950 British and Monaco Grand Prix. At the British Grand Prix at Silverstone it was 2 qualifying sessions, one on Friday, one on Saturday. Your best time over those 2 sessions was the one that was submitted and determined your qualifying spot on the grid. At Monaco, however, just the very next race, there was a qualifying session on the Thursday where the top 5 got locked in. Then in the one on the Saturday, it was the rest of the grid that was decided. 2 different races, 2 different rule books. But then at the 1963 French Grand Prix, the race director decided to throw out the existing rule books and just make up his own instead. So then the 1963 French Grand Prix, Reims in Champagne country, France. Located something like 5 miles east of the town of Reims, and like all the other French circuits used in F1 up to this point, held on public roads. Unlike the creme de la creme of French circuits, the Circuit de la Sarthe at Le Mans or even Spa in Belgium, it resembled a mangled triangle. And like Spa and Le Mans, it was a long-ass, high-speed circuit that basically used the public roads to connect a few villages together. It was also home to its own Petit Le Mans between 1926 and 1967, when a 12-hour race was held on the circuit, which must have been horrendously scary. It only had 2 real braking points, a La Source-style hairpin at the north end of the circuit, and what's labelled on the map as Turn 5. So it really was an engine killer. And the teams at the time believed it was going to be engine power that would be the big difference here, because if you get a bad exit out of one of the corners, you'll make it all back through just sheer engine power. They believed that because the cars all use the same brakes pretty much, and they all use the same tyres at this point, then cornering speeds were going to be the same, braking distance was going to be the same, so just tune the engine for maximum power and just yeet it around this track. Yeah, they had a different understanding of things back then. It had also been raining on the day of the Thursday practice session, and tradition was at Reims that practice would be held on Thursday, qualifying on the Friday, and then the Saturday had no racing because, well, this is Champagne country, and people need an opportunity to get absolutely loaded. There was also a programme for support races, including sports cars, and teams like Aston Martin and Ferrari had brought along their Le Mans cars to give them a little bit of extra development so they could develop them on into 1964, this race happening 2 or 3 weeks after the 1963 24 Hours of Le Mans. By the evening practice session on the Thursday, though, it had dried out, and Mike Parks in the Ferrari 330p had set a 220.2 over the 5 miles, which then gave the other drivers the green light in the Formula 1 cars to start going out and putting in times representative of what they should have been doing at that circuit. That was when Jim Clark started out and initially set a 221. He then started shaving off a few tenths here and there, and finally set a 220.2. The same time as the Le Mans Ferrari that Parks had set that initial time in, and that Le Mans Ferrari had a much bigger and much more powerful engine. By the end of the session, only Clark and Graham Hill had set sub 221s in the Formula 1 cars. And the rules had been broken even before the event had even started. The teams had agreed a long time before this with the FIA that there must be at least 1 free weekend between each race to allow for a period of cooldown and race preparation for the next Grand Prix. This race, however, was taking place just 1 week after the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, and while the teams were saying, "but the rules," the FIA was saying, "look lads, we've submitted the entry list and got everything scheduled and ready to go. Cope." One team on the entry list, the ATS team, did pull out last minute due to time constraints, and also because they were concerned for lack of straight line speed. So the engine power teams were left scratching their heads. The Lotus 25 had about 195 horsepower from its 1.5 litre engine, less than the Ferrari, but Clark was 1.7 seconds faster than Surtees' Ferrari. The Ferrari probably had 2, maybe 3 horses more than the Climax engine in the back of the Lotus, but that in itself isn't 1.5 seconds, even at a track like Reims. But this section isn't a dig at Ferrari's haha engine power go brr philosophy. There were other teams thinking this too, only for Clark to just be, well, better than everybody else. So the grid was settled on the Friday, and then the Saturday they had the day off so that everybody could get pissed and eat many foods. But then moving on to race day on the Sunday, more rules got broken. Graham Hill, who had been having car trouble all weekend despite his stunner of a lap to be on the front row, stalled on the grid. Now, the procedure here is different to how it is in Formula 1 today. In those days, if you stalled, you stayed on the grid and the start would take place normally. You would just have to sit there and hope that nobody crashed into you. Only then could the mechanics come out, push the car off the grid, get it going again, and then Hill could join the race. I know. Why not abort the start and then push him off the track? I mean, this is the 1960s. If nobody dies, nothing changes. However, on this occasion, the race director did abandon the start. Hill's mechanics rushed onto the grid under the instructions of the race director and gave the car a push start to get it going again, and then they pushed him back into his slot on the grid. Now, there is debate as to whether or not this is legal because the start had been aborted, but when Hill was back in place, the race director, Raymond Roche, raised the flag to begin the start procedure again, which left no time for BRM to check if what they had done was legal by the FIA, or for the other teams to say, hang on, how are they allowed to do that? Because Roche was against the clock and needed to get this race underway, he'd actually raised a red flag and not a green flag. Now, you might know the red flag as the international racing symbol for stop fucking racing, but he just let the flag drop and 19 of the 21 cars zoomed off into the French countryside. Now, imagine if that had happened today. The drivers would all get one hell of a chewing out, or the race director would get one hell of a chewing out by the FIA, or nobody would do anything because they'd just be sat there confused going, why the hell is there a red flag waving when we're not even racing yet? Think back to the 1999 Luxembourg Grand Prix when everybody sat there as the 5 red lights stayed on for about 3 days. The entire grid, per the rules, should have been penalised or disqualified for ignoring the red flag. The only 2 drivers who wouldn't have been penalised were Phil Hill and Maston Gregory, but only because they'd stalled their cars out of confusion as to what was going on. They then received a push start once the field had gone by, which is actually against the rules. But since the race director had already allowed Hill to have one, they were allowed one too. Clark was off in the distance, pulling away at a rate of something like 2 seconds a lap from Dan Gurney, who had managed to get past Graham Hill into second place, and Gurney had a little more on the Lotus in terms of acceleration out of the corners, but Clark had got him over the entirety of the lap. Graham, meanwhile, had slipped back to about 5th, and by lap 10 that gap was up to 15 seconds or so. So it seemed, barring anything going wrong with the Lotus, Clark had it in the bag. The battle would be for who came second. But then something started to go wrong with Clark's car. It wasn't sounding particularly healthy anymore, and he was having to short shift by about 1000 RPM just to keep the engine alive. But then Lady Luck intervened. It started to rain, and because everybody else now had to slow down, Clark slowing down wasn't so much of a problem. Everything had been neutralised quite nicely. By lap 40, the lead had increased to 20 seconds, and then the news filtered through that the 3 cars that had been given push starts, one as per the race director's instructions, would all be penalised 1 minute. This then meant that Bruce McLaren had no reason to race Graham Hill anymore, and he and his teammate Tony Maggs were assured of 2nd and 3rd place as a result. But McLaren's car gave up later on, as the ignition system failed. Hill then started to have more car trouble and he slipped behind Maggs to 3rd, while Jack Brabham, who at one point had been at the side of the road with a conked out engine, had climbed back to 4th as a result of misfortunes of others, and was almost within that 1 minute window of Hill with a lap to go. Clark managed to nurse his engine home, surviving all 53 laps and finishing the race with a total time of 2 hours, 10 minutes and 54 seconds, with South African Tony Maggs in 2nd, a minute behind. Hill held on to 3rd even with his penalty, meaning that he finished just 2 seconds ahead of Brabham, who just missed out on 3rd place. But to add insult to injury to Hill, the race stewards and organisers decided post-race to strip Hill of his 3rd place points, but was allowed to keep his result. And if that isn't enough to round out a calamitous day, the race director actually waved the checkered flag after Clark had crossed the line on that final lap, meaning that Maggs was the first person to see it. And as we've seen recently, this isn't the last time that the FIA and the race directors would be a little inconsistent and pick and choose when it comes to applying rules that are written down. While the decisions made in the last 12 months appeared to be for the show or for Netflix, these were more down to the time that it happened, where standardisation wasn't really a thing. Clark went on to dominate the rest of the season, winning the championship by 54 points to 29 because of the whole drop scores and stuff like that. he would be more dominant in 1965, taking 100% of the points on offer, something that nobody has done since and is very unlikely to unless someone obviously wins every race of the season. So there we have it, a look at the 1960s Michael Masi. If this has been something new for you and you've learned something new here today, then be sure to give the video a like. And if you want to see more stuff like this and you're not already, get subscribed and also get that bell on, as you'll never miss out on a future video. Hopefully. It's also to get me to 100k so I can bin off that Moreno video. Massive thanks as ever to the kind folk at Patreon for their continued support, and if you do want to help support me at a more personal level, you can do so by following the link in the description box, where there's also links to my Discord and also to my socials. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a cracking day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again on Sunday evening for the final round of the Potato Nation Sunday League from Imola. 90 minutes, double points, there'll be a pit stop, and it's going to be an absolute slugfest in that McLaren. So if you want to see that, you can join in with that on Sunday. But if you don't care much for the sim racing stuff, I'll see you on Monday for whatever video will be on Monday. So until Sunday or Monday, goodbye.